Hey everyone, welcome to the second part in this series on building the website component of the new V3 experience. Thanks to all those who watched and commented on the first part. People were generally pretty positive about it, which is great. This video is going to focus primarily on the sort of setup that I'm going to be using when I'm coding the V3 website. It's going to center probably around VS Code versus Vim, which also makes for a great clickbaity thumbnail on the video, which is a wonderful coincidence. But I'm going to be talking just generally about what I'll be using in terms of tech, in terms of the tooling I'm using to create this. But I want to start by answering a couple of questions that were asked, and also making one observation that one of our really experienced maintainers made. So I'm going to start with that. So when watching this, DJ, one of our team, said that he was surprised there weren't more visuals in this, that he was surprised that I wasn't showing off more of, I guess, the UX side, the UI side, the progress with that, maybe looking more at some of the progress on the tracks as well. So I want this series to be specifically around the website part. So I'm not going to touch too much on the tracks, the work that our open source community are doing. I might look at how we're consuming all of their work into the website, how that gets processed through our Git code and other things. But I'm not going to be worrying too much about what everyone else is doing. There's lots of other videos that I've been making around that. This will have some content around the creation of the actual website visuals. I'll be talking about some of the decisions we're making at a sort of UX and product level as well. But again, I'll probably do more standalone videos on those individual components. Why are we making this decision? How's this thing going to work? For this series, I really just want to focus around the journey of making that website, what it feels like to make a pretty large website with a lot of functionality for a lot of different people, and the trade-offs around that. So I just wanted to clarify that and clear that up. There will be lots of videos coming with those other parts on, but this series specifically, if you subscribe to this playlist, is going to be around the website side of things. So then the first question that I was asked that I thought was worth mentioning on the video was, is V3 going to be more beginner friendly? And so the answer, and I gave this in the comments, but I'll expand a little bit here. So yes, it will be more beginner friendly in terms of us having the in-browser coding interface. One of the big barriers, and if you watch the 4 Ways Exercism Sucks video, I talk about this more. One of the biggest barriers is having to download all of the new tooling and all of the new stuff onto your computer to be able to actually get started with the language. So having this in-browser coding in V3 is going to remove that massive barrier. Now, while that sort of means it's going to be easier to pick up new languages, which naturally makes it better for beginners, the more experienced you are, the more languages you've probably touched, the more comfortable you are on a command line or installing tooling, it doesn't mean that Exercism is suddenly going to be amazingly beginner friendly. We've designed Exercism up to this point to be great for learning a second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever, 50th if you're Eric, language, but it's not designed for someone starting from scratch. Now, we do want to make that part of the Exercism experience, and we're going to at some point in the not too distant future. We want to add a 0 to some level of knowledge part of Exercism. I don't know what that looks like yet, so I'm going to be careful about the words I use, but some sort of on ramp from having no knowledge to being able to go through an Exercism track. So that will be coming, and things like the in-browser coding massively lay really fundamental pieces of the groundwork that we would need in place for that. But when V3 launches, it's still going to be targeted primarily at developers who either want to upskill in the language they already know or learn another new language. The second question that I got asked was why we're dumping the existing code base, why I'm starting again. And I sort of touched on this a little bit in the last video, but I thought I'd briefly go into a little bit more depth on that decision. And there are 2 fundamental parts to that decision, 2 reasons. The first is that it's a lot more fun to work from scratch. this is something that I'm going to be sort of dedicating every ounce of free time I get for the next few months into building. And it's a lot easier just to start again with all of those thoughts and ideas you've had, all of the new skills and experience you've developed over a period of time, and then just sort of reapply all of those new best practices that you've probably developed into a new code base. And that's what I want to do for this. So it's a code base that's a fresh start that feels like, I can be taking pride in every line of code. I know the test coverage of everything I'm doing. I can make sure that I'm test driving the development of that. Whereas when you've had a project that's been there, that's taken contributions, that's evolved, that's reacted to different things that people want, it's often, especially with Exercism, where a lot of the time that's spent doing that is just, evenings and weekends trying to throw in free time, the quality of the code base does tend to suffer a little bit. And it's really hard to know how much test coverage is there, or it's hard to just get a feel of how good that code base is. So starting afresh is a pleasurable, enjoyable thing, and it gives me that ability to put those best practices into place. The second reason, which is, I guess, maybe more pragmatic, is to consider what's changing in Exercism and how much of the code that's there at the moment will stay and how much will be rewritten. And so I think it's worth just considering what Exercism as a website actually is. So firstly, obviously there's a whole load of user interface, a whole load of HTML and CSS that people interact with. We're designing everything pretty much from scratch. I mean, the pages are going to have the same sort of basic structure in some places, but a lot of pages will change. There'll be a lot of new pages that are coming in. So I'm presuming that most of the CSS, HTML and JavaScript are all going to have to be rewritten pretty much from scratch. So that's probably half the code base that would need to be rewritten. And so just not having to worry about rewriting it and just worrying about writing it from scratch feels a lot easier to me, a lot more sensible. I mean, I can still go and copy and paste bits from the old setup if I want to, but certainly for that HTML side, I really don't think I'll be doing a lot of that. I don't find it hard or slow to write HTML or CSS. So I think that will be makes sense to throw that away and start again. And then in terms of the functionality, the mentoring side of Exercism is changing dramatically. So all of the existing mentoring code is probably going to go. The way that the queues work, the way that mentors find the next exercise, all of that's changing. So all of that would be rewritten as well. And there's a lot of complexity in that. There's a lot of SQL in there. If you see the SQL queries that get generated to calculate some of those things, they're literally dozens of lines long. So getting rid of that and being able to start afresh with the mentoring side feels sensible. Similarly for the Teams element, we have a whole extra subsite of Exercism, teams.exercism.io, which is built into the main code base. That's all going and it's going to be folded into the main website itself. So that's another huge area that we would just want to delete and start again on. The areas that we are keeping, I guess, like the data layer is the key one, where all of the models of how the exercises and solutions actually fit together. That bit won't be changing as dramatically, but it could certainly do with a spring clean. That's the sort of thing where you want to really understand how good your test coverage is and everything else. So I'm starting that from scratch, but I imagine there'll be lots of bits that I choose to sort of cherry pick over it and bring in to the code base from there. And then the final sort of two bits, one is our Git integration. So we really heavily rely on using Git as a layer between the open source side of things with the tracks, the community building and bringing those into the website. That code works pretty well. I think, again, that could do with a bit of a spring clean, but that's one of the areas I imagine I'll just lift and move over. The other area I don't think will change at all pretty much is the API. I think that's going to remain pretty much exactly the same. So we'll be picking that up and putting that straight in. That's got good test coverage. It's not really changed at all since we launched V2. So it's pretty stable, solid code. So although we will be changing the API in the future, I think that's one part that I can just lift and bring over. But it's much easier to lift that up and bring it over than it is to try and carve everything else around that and just leave that in the middle. So I hope that answers some of those questions. My own pleasure and happiness and ease and speed of doing things, and also the dramaticness of the level of changes in the code base, I think mean that 70-80% of that code is going to get touched or rewritten. It makes sense in my eyes to have that clean slate and just pull things in when needed. So those are the questions out the way. If you have more questions, please ask. It's really interesting for me to see what people are thinking. And again, if you've got any suggestions or anything like that, please post those again. So to move on to the main topic of this video, which is what my setup looks like. So this, a bit of a personal sort of look back at the last few years. So probably 6 years ago now, I invested a bit of time in getting a configuration that I was quite happy with. I shifted to Vim at that stage, and have been working in Vim comfortably for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm by no means an expert Vim user. I think very few people are. I'm pretty sure I scrape the surface of what Vim is capable of, but I can happily spend a few hours working in Vim and not leave the keyboard and be functional in it and be fast in it. My fingers therefore feel very attached to Vim. There's a real sense of familiarity there. But because I'm not using much of the capacity that Vim has to offer, I don't have very many plugins or anything else. I thought it would be good to explore what other options are out there. Both Atom and VS Code. I think Atom was brand new when I moved to Vim. I don't even know if VS Code existed then. I think it probably didn't. So both of those certainly have become the very modern editors they are in the last few years. So I thought I would explore what it would look like to move to VS Code and try and get some of the benefits of that, especially with things like the new GitHub announcement where you can now run a sort of, I haven't looked in depth, but I think VS Code in the browser is very sort of tightly integrated environments. Things like, I think it's Git Lens, which gives you, a really nice feeling of what your Git status looks like while you're coding. The really great autocomplete support, all of those things in VS Code felt like there'd be good reasons to move. So I have a new Mac. My other one is fallen to pieces after 6 years. I got it at the same time. So I've got a new Mac, and so I spent the weekend, last weekend, a few days ago now, setting that up. I probably invested about 2 days solidly into just getting a VS Code setup that was, I guess, as familiar to me as possible. So putting Vim bindings on was the first thing in that. But then getting loads of other extensions, getting it configured, making it feel nice. And I enjoyed it in many ways. It was a good experience once you've got all of the keyboard shortcuts set up. And because I just don't use the mouse in Vim, it's really important for that. I felt like I could become comfortable in there. But there were just some things that I couldn't get a feel for. So one of the things is the difference in the way tabs and splits work between VS Code and Vim. So I have a pretty solid layout in Vim where I normally have a 2x2 grid of things. I can very quickly navigate between them. And while I sort of got something similar to that working in VS Code, I just didn't feel like I could quickly move between things. It just didn't quite feel comfortable in the same way. Other things like quickly being able just to like make new files and start hacking around in those. Even like jumping to files, like there's the sort of control P or whatever. It just didn't feel right. So after 2 days, to the point where I got quite frustrated and demoralized, I decided to move back to Vim and to really sort of start again. I wiped my vimrc and started writing it out. And Vim itself has grown loads in the last like 6 years. Vim 8 has come out, which has got loads of cool support for stuff. There's now like a terminal built in as a split you can have. So there's loads of cool stuff in there. So I decided to invest a bit more into learning VimScript, actually understand more about how some of these plugins that I'd used previously and were considering using now worked. And so I've been on a journey for the last 4 days of sort of really getting that set up quite nicely. And I'm quite pleased with where it's at now. It's very much a text editor, not an IDE, which is what I want. But I've installed a lot of, or a few plugins that I think are really useful and working well. I've got some nice autocomplete working. I've never been a fan of autocomplete. I used it a lot when I used to write C# in Visual Studio. But beyond that, I find often it can just stop my brain from flowing and just get in the way, having someone else suggesting things to me all the time. I'm even personifying it as someone else rather than something else. But I think, yeah, I'm going to give it a go and see. So I've got a plugin for that that's quite cool. I'm working with Solargraph, which is a Ruby language server. So I'm going to experiment with it for a couple of weeks and see how I feel. I've put all of those in my .files repo on Git, on GitHub, which I'll link to. So if you're interested, please take a look. I'd love your suggestions and issues. I would also accept pull requests, but please only do that if you think I'm actually definitely going to want it, so I'm not having to try and... I'm going to review the code of everything because I want to actually understand what's going on. So if you do send me a pull request for that, please explain what's going on rather than just sending me a load of Vim script that I then have to try and work out. But certainly issues would be really welcome. It'd be really nice from other people who are experienced Vim users to learn more about, you know, what makes it better for you. I've also discovered on Mac, there's this new brew file, which is like a gem file. So Homebrew is the package manager that most people I think use on Macs. But you can now have a brew file which lists all of your, I don't know what they're called, I guess programs. There's a brew word for it. But you can list casks, whatever they are. I don't really understand how brew works, but you can list things in a file and you can run brew bundle and it just installs everything, which is great for portability because it means obviously you can just pick that brew file up, put it on another machine, run brew bundle and get a whole load of that, that same setup. So that's been a really nice discovery. I've also moved to the Fish shell. I've been using Bash forever. Again, I'm not a particularly strong Bash user, probably a particularly weak Bash user. I tried using a Z shell, ZSH, I don't know how you pronounce it, for a while, which was cool, and installed some plugins for that as you do. It was okay. It had things in there that were valuable for me, but I found that autocomplete support frustrating at best and just downright annoying sometimes. And I also found it to be slower than Bash. I don't know if that's just the setup I've got where it was just loading too many plugins or what, but it felt heavy somehow, and I don't want my terminal to feel heavy. So I'm sure all of these are my faults, not anything to do with the shell or anything else, but I decided to move to Fish because a couple of people I respect recommended it to me. And because it claims to be really fast and light, and I've been really impressed. I really like it. It feels light, which is the thing, but it's also powerful. The auto completion works really well. It has just a beautiful memory of whatever you've typed before, so you can just start typing a command and it'll find it from your history straight away. Like Control R on Bash, but it just seems to work a lot better somehow. So yeah, I've been really enjoying that. That feels like it's been a step forward. I'd happily recommend Fish to anyone. I think try it and see if you like it. What's to lose? But I did struggle again to get that configured with VS Code. That was another thing that just wouldn't seem to work. That's just my default shell everywhere, but in VS Code it just didn't seem to have an environment loaded. And it was just these little things that kept on stacking up to making me feel I'd spent like 2 days on VS Code, and I would rather invest that time into getting a really good Vim setup than into a really good VS Code setup. But I'm sure these are all of my failings, not anyone else's or anything else's. And who knows, in 3 years I might go back and try all these things again. But yeah, that's my main setup, I guess. So on a Mac, using Fish, using Vim. I've installed Prettier because we're using that in V3 for all of the markdown stuff. I tried using it for Ruby and it was okay, but I've decided to try Rebocop. RubyCop is something that tells you all the things you're doing wrong in Ruby and makes suggestions. I have a sort of love-hate relationship with it. I think as a piece of tech, it's great, obviously. We actually use a lot of the underlying AST parsing functionality as well from that in things like the representers and analyzers for the Ruby track. But some of the defaults in there I found frustrating, and I've never just quite got on with it. So I thought this time I would give it a proper go, get a really good config setup that I felt I was happy with in terms of defaults, and just try and really push for getting a really strong level of consistency across the code base. One of the reasons I'm wanting to invest in all of this new tooling now, one is to give me just a bit of a fresh start and a boost, which I think is nice on a new project. But the other one is to just try and really get to a point where I feel like we're going to have really good consistency in this code base, where it has standards that mean other people, when they do contribute, there's a very clear set of guidance to be held to. And so, getting things like RubyCop and then Prettier for the V3 content repository, those things I think are going to make big steps forward into that, which is good. So the new project, the new website is on GitHub now. I'll link to that in the comments as well. You'll see, I don't know, probably 5-10 commits, I don't know how many, that sort of go through setting up a new Rails project. I've put together probably the first 6 or 7 models. I've started by working on the concept unlocking part of it, mainly because that's the newest or the most different bit of V3. The idea that a concept is going to be this sort of first-class citizen. You unlock concepts, you can make notes by concepts. The concepts that you've unlocked determine which other exercises you can do. There was no such thing as a concept previously. There was a hard-coded list of exercises which unlocked other exercises. So I've been modeling all that, which has been quite interesting. My brain definitely works in code, so I've thought of a lot more since I've been doing it, firmed up a lot of ideas in my head about how this is going to work. Probably the first big architectural decision that I've made, and this might change, we'll see, but is to use proper join tables for the prerequisites that an exercise has and the things that it unlocks. So I originally started modeling this as JSON columns, where it was going to be like a list of prerequisites and a list of concepts that are unlocked. But I decided to go down the proper join tables route, mainly because I think that's always going to be a bit faster. Well-indexed join tables are lightning, and I figure that's going to be better than trying to do JSON parsing in real time in MySQL. The big change from what's one of the problems in V2 is that you have a list of the exercises you unlock. So when you complete a solution, you unlock solutions for all of the new exercises that you get access to. And that means that when you download it, you're downloading a solution that's in the database, which means that your command line has the unique identifier of that solution. So the things that you have access to, you have records for in a database for all of those exercises. Now, that works great theoretically, but it means if a maintainer changes the structure of a track as to what's locked or unlocked, all of those dependencies need recalculating. So we have to go through, and I have a script that goes through and does this, and it takes like 6 hours to run for every single solution in Exercism to check that someone's still got the correct access to the correct solutions. There's a lot of permutations it has to take into play for that, whether somebody has already started a solution, in which case we never take it away from them, a whole load of stuff. And so I've decided that I just didn't want to have that sort of permanent list of unlocked things hard-coded in the database anymore. I wanted, when you say what solutions can I access, I want that to be a query that's going and looking at the interrelations between the concepts you've done and the solutions that you can therefore access via prerequisites. So modeling all that as a series of join tables and queries, that's probably the biggest bit of work so far. There's a sort of, 12, 14 line bit of SQL in there that calculates that. credit to the Stack Overflow post that I stole most of that from. I did reference that in the code, so go and have a look at that and upvote it. But yeah, that's been an interesting sort of early bit of architecture just to play around with, to get a feel for how unlocking is going to work. I feel like it's the bit that has the potential to change the most in the next 3 months, because it's the bit I haven't done for Exercism before, so it's the bit where I don't understand all of my blind spots yet. But yeah, that's fun. So take a look at the code base, have a nose around. Feel free to leave comments on commits if you want to. I'm going to turn issues off because I don't really want that to be something I'm constantly having to talk to people about. I want to be able to get my head down. But if there's specific questions you have on commits, I'm more than happy for you to post them on there, and I'll try and answer them. Or feel free to ask questions on this video as well. That works well for me. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope that was interesting. Next time, hopefully I've got a bit further forward and I can tell you about a few more of the decisions that I've been making. If you've got questions, please let me know and I'll answer them at the beginning of the next video. And if you want to get involved in Exercism, in building out the tracks, and you're not already involved, there's an email address down below in the description that you can email, and we would love your support. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks.